Hello and welcome back to the third rail. We have a set on the bench today. This is Märklin 2660, and if you follow the channel you might remember it from a video I published about 6 months ago when it joined the collection. If not, there is a little link at the top if you fancy catching up at some point. It wasn't working well when I tested it at the time, but as usual I left fixing it until I had a need for it. I have received a complimentary 2-coach set for this train in the meantime, and I thought this would be a good reason to get the set going so we can enjoy the train in all its glory. So let me unpack everything and get ready. There we go. So, what is wrong with this train? When I tested it, the locomotive ran, but it was horribly noisy and hesitant in places on the track. It also needed a new set of traction tyres, if I remember well. So we will need to look into this. The coaches all need attention too. They were all very noisy. Actually, let me show you. Mind your ears. Nice, isn't it? But the main issue was another one. They derailed in random spots on the layout, so we will need to investigate and fix this. Attempting to troubleshoot derailments with a poorly running locomotive is asking for trouble, really, so this is where we'll start. Let's go! We had seen in the original presentation that this model is basically brand new. It only needs lubricating and a change of tires, so I will only focus on a few things to look out for with this tooling in this video. I did film the entire process though, and if you'd like to see the entire servicing step by step, let me know in the comment section. If there is enough demand, I will edit and upload the material in a dedicated video later on. As with most Märklin Altbau or old construction locomotives with this wheel arrangement, the body is held to the chassis by 2 screws accessible from the side of the trucks at both ends. There's one here and the other one there. Once these 2 screws are loosened, the body simply lifts off. Access to the motor is somewhat restricted on this tooling, and there is not enough slack in the wiring to drop the bogie safely. If this wasn't enough, we have a spring under compression between the chassis and the base of the magnet windings. So whether it is for servicing or if the bogie needs dropping for whatever reason, the motor will have to be dismantled in situ first. The light fitting and wiring need to be moved out of the way, and after removing the brushes, the motor plate screws can be removed. In their wisdom, Märklin gave us an access hole for the bottom screw, so it looks like they were expecting the owner to dismantle the motor the way I am doing now. Now, the cover plate needs to be pulled away from the magnet just enough to become free, then tilted so it can slide out. This needs to be done gently to avoid breaking any solder joints. The magnet will then follow with the help of the spring it sits on. And there we go. Open sesame! The spring I mentioned is used to push the motor bogie down to improve the adherence of the driving wheels. It would stand upright between the chassis and the base of the magnet windings. You'll find this arrangement in other Märklin E52s or BR152s, be it in the older version, the 3366, or in other versions of this set, or even in later models made in the 90s and noughties. Putting the motor back together can be a bit fiddly too. We need to place the spring first, then compress it with the base of the windings, all while positioning the magnet on the motor housing and using the locating pins to keep everything together. Now the armature can be installed, followed by the motor cover. After checking both motor and wheels turn freely, the screws can then be reinstalled. The next point to pay particular attention to are the trucks at each end of the locomotive. This type of locomotive relies heavily on them for its connection to ground. The truck axles and their contact springs underneath need to be clean and free of oxidation. Everything else on this model is pretty straightforward. So, here is our freshly lubricated and newly booted model. Let's give it a quick back and forth. Yep, it's all fine. The lights won't turn on in analog mode with this type of decoder, so we are all clear. Now let's have a look at the coaches. Our first problem here are the screechy wheels. Now that's easily fixed. All we need is a drop of oil on all the bearings and we should be fine. And indeed, we are. So now we can look at the derailments. So what's happening on that front? Well, it's all a bit random. All the cars seem to be derailing here and there, mainly on the bridge, but not all the time. And there's also one area at ground level. Now we need to narrow things down here. So the first thing to check is the track. Now, I've done this already and I couldn't find anything wrong. Additionally, everything I put on the track recently ran without issue. So I think I can safely assume that that bit is okay. So if it isn't the track, the most likely issue is going to have to do with the couplings. So I'm going to use the method I described in a little helper video I made about the topic a while back. I've put a link at the top again if you haven't seen it. Okay, let's have a closer look at one of the cars. So if I move the coupling, it doesn't feel smooth and the coupling gets stuck. Now that is not standard behavior. Obviously, something like that can only cause a few operational problems. Now I'll grab a car that seems to be behaving properly. See, when I move the coupling, then release it, it automatically returns to center. Now this is the behavior we need to aim for on all the other cars in the set. Let's have a closer look at the coupling to see how it works first. So you will have already noticed that we are dealing with short couplings. Usually these couplings are attached to a coupling kinematic. Basically a mechanism that allows the coupling arm to move in several directions simultaneously. In the central position, the coupling is close to the chassis, and if I move the coupling to the side, we can see that the arm not only pivots, but also extends a bit. This allows the coach to negotiate curves without bumpers getting locked with the ones on the next coach. All this while keeping the distance between cars to a minimum. The coupling kinematic used in this coach is different from other Märklin mechanisms used at the time. The coaches were developed in cooperation with tricks, so this might be one of their input, a bit of their DNA, so to speak. But I do not know if this is the case. For science, I have taken a car apart, so we can have a look at how everything fits together. The first unusual thing is the post you can see on top of the chassis. It is made of metal, it goes through the chassis and is what the bogie is attached to. Now, by that time, Märklin usually used bogies that would simply clip into a mounting hole on the chassis. The chassis on this model is very flexible, so I am assuming that the post gives the construction a bit more rigidity. Now I'll turn the chassis to the other side, and now we can see how everything is assembled. We have the post, the chassis, then the coupling arm, the bogie, and there is a C-clip that keeps everything together. If we flip the chassis over, we also find a U-shaped spring. Its role is to provide tension to the coupling arm so it returns to center. We also have a few openings which are meant for a few elements that are molded on the surface of the coupling arm. There is a hook near the coupling head that will go in the larger opening, the one with the two curves on the end of the chassis. And on the other end of the arm we have a peg on each side that will fit in the guiding slots on either sides of the spring. This combination gives the coupling arm its stability and guides its movements. The pegs are also the pivot points for the coupling arm. When the arm moves, one of the pegs will hit the end of its guiding slot and the arm will start to pivot around it. And since the pivot point is offset from the center of the bogie, the arm will follow a slightly wider curve, which will enable it to keep the coupling head away from the buffer in curves. This motion is the reason for the large hole in the center of the coupling arm. Then we have the bogie, where we'll find another set of pegs. The long peg in the center will fit in a slot at the front of the coupling arm, and the two smaller ones at the back will rest behind the base of the coupling arm. As you can see, this arrangement links coupling and bogie together. There is only a tiny bit of give sideways here and there, so the two parts can only move at the same time. Now, this is quite elaborate as far as the engineering is concerned. I have not seen this coupling kinematic on other cars in the collection, but my collection stops in 1989-90. I don't know if this was a one-off or whether this was used more widely on later Märklin models. I do see a few benefits compared to what was used on Württemberg cars or 4-axles Umbauwagen, for example. The spring is unlikely to get damaged or dislodged, and the construction is very stiff. The material used are unlikely to suffer any damage under normal conditions. There is not much space for anything large to get stuck anywhere, and everything is built to tight tolerances and tightly squeezed together. Now, despite the amount of friction generated when the parts are moving, no lubrication is needed. So, now that I know how this works, I should be able to troubleshoot my problem. Let's have a look at one of the misbehaving coaches now. On this one we can see that the coupling gets stuck randomly. Now I'm trying to move the coupling by hand. Everything can still move, but it doesn't feel smooth. I can feel something getting caught. But a bit of pressure is enough to free the arm. I can also feel that there is still tension in the spring. The whole assembly looks cosmetically okay, and the hook holding the coupling arm at the front is intact, and there is nothing in the way there. So logically, the only place left where something could get stuck are the guiding pegs and slot under the bogie. So that is where I am going to have to look next. Now, it would be very tempting at this stage to simply remove the C-clip and lift the bogie off the chassis. Please don't do that, you will regret it. It might take you hours to fit everything back together. Ask me how I know. Instead, we are going to drop the chassis and for this we'll need to get into the car. To disassemble the car, we need to remove the roof. It is simply clipped on, so it is just a matter of pushing it up with gentle pressure. This should release the clips and free the roof. The little black pipes on each end are flexible and can be gently pushed out of the way, after which the roof will simply lift off. Now we can see the elaborate interior. There's quite a lot of potential for modding here, for lighting and passengers. Now, if we look at the side walls, we can see a few black tabs. This is what holds the chassis and coach body together. We need to insert the tip of a flathead screwdriver in between the tab and the walls and gently pry the tab away from the wall whilst applying gentle downward pressure. With each successive tab, the chassis will progressively be released. With the body removed, we can now see the steel weight, which simply rests on the chassis, and it can simply be lifted out. Now it used to be glued, but the glue has dried off. And we have reached our destination. Now everything looks okay, but upon closer inspection, which it doesn't come out well on camera, but the chassis is covered in rust deposit. There's a fine brown dust everywhere, and that dust is coming from the weight. See, if I rub my finger against it, rust simply comes off and sticks to my finger. That would explain the grittiness I felt when moving the coupling. Some of the rust must have got into the guiding slots and is enough for the pegs to get caught. So a clean should be enough to get this going again. So it's time for the customary cotton bud and a bit of alcohol here. But avoid doing what I did here and start by wiping the dust from the chassis before proceeding to the guiding slots and pegs. Thinking about it now, I think some compressed air would have worked nicely here too, and that would have been more than enough. No need for any kind of liquid. So, after a few cotton buds, we now have a free moving coupling on each side. Now, we fixed our initial problem, but in fact that was only a symptom of another one, our rusty weight, and that needs fixing before I can reassemble the car, or it won't be long and I'll have to do this all over again. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the rust, and I'll simply use a Dremel for that with an abrasive brush. I think it's a carbide brush. See, we quickly get back to a shiny steel. So I shall finish this off camera. One moment please. And there we are. It's all clean. But that won't be enough, because rust is likely to come back pretty quickly. So I'm going to treat this weight. I could paint it, that would work, but I've discovered a new thing recently, which is electroplating, and that's what I'm going to use to treat this weight instead. It's the same method and equipment I presented in a video I published a while back, and you can see a link at the top if you fancy having a look. Using electroplating, we'll cover the steel plate with a layer of nickel that will protect it from corrosion. I just run this for about 10 minutes on both ends, as my plate is not fully submerged here. If I was using a larger container, it would just take 10 minutes. So, and after electroplating and a bit of polishing, we are back. The aspect is not perfect, but that's down to the preparation. but it will do the job. It is covered with a layer of nickel, which is what matters here. So it's time for reassembly. Put the weight back in. I'll clip the body back on. It only fits one way. Now I can put the roof back on. And we are done. So I've used the same process on the other passenger coach, so I'm not going to show this one. The luggage van is a bit different though, so let's go over a few things briefly. Dismantling the luggage van is the same. The roof needs to come off first. Again, we have some clips. Note that the brake cab area is a bit stiffer, but there are no additional fasteners there. It just needs a bit more pressure. Once the roof is off, the doors will fall off in the process. So we'll put them aside, and we'll need to release a few tabs again to remove the body. So it's the same process as before. Once the body is off, it will reveal an additional floor here with a couple of rusty weights again. The weights and floors need to come off to free the chassis. There are a few tabs in each corner that might need a bit of persuasion for this to happen. That's it, we have arrived. And we can see another weight there, which is even rustier than what we have seen so far. Okay, so now I'll follow the same process as before. Quick wipe to remove the rust deposits and free the coupling arms, and I'll electroplate all the weights again here, using the same preparation and method again. And here they are after 10 minutes and a polish. Now we can reassemble everything. Weight, false floor, the other sets of weights, clip the body back on, fit the doors, check they can slide. If they don't, they are not fitted to the correct opening. And then we can reinstall the roof, and you might want to hold the doors in place during this so that they don't fall off at the wrong time. And we are done. We have 3 coaches, no longer screechy, and ready for a test drive around the main line. Let's see if all this work was worth it. We'll couple the locomotive first. Nice and smooth. Now let's send the set around the main line. Oh, that's already day and night in terms of performance. The set is behaving, no derailment so far. No problem on the bridge. And we're back. Okay, let's get the complementary coaches. I have oiled the axles and checked the couplings there too. Everything works properly. I even had a peek inside to check the weights are still in good shape. No problems there. Now let's rail them and see how this goes. Smooth start. All pretty effortless. Oh, it looks like we have an active braking section here. It's a bit out of sync. Bizarre. Let's give it a bit more power. Still no derailment. Now we're back on the bridge. No problem anywhere. And we're back. Well, I think the time has finally come to sit back and enjoy the train now. I'll raise the pantograph for good measure. And we're off. I wouldn't have thought it would have taken so much effort to get to this point, but I think it was worth it in the end. I had never dealt with this type of coupling kinematic before, so the experience made me a bit wiser too. So I hope you found this video useful, or maybe simply enjoyable to watch, hopefully enough for you to give it a like, or maybe even hit the subscribe button. Many thanks in advance. I shall now leave you on a few impressions of the sets around the layout. Enjoy!